Greetings, denizens of the World Weird Web. Tobias Wayland here, the Singular Fortean Society's editor-in-chief and lead investigator, bringing you my presentation on the Lake Michigan Mothman. So, I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about the Singular Fortean Society and what it is exactly that we do. So the Singular Fortean Society is an organization that was started by myself and my wife Emily back in 2016, and we investigate paranormal or Fortean phenomena and then report on it journalistically. So if you're not familiar with the word Fortean, that comes from Charles Fort. So Charles Fort was a collector of weird news stories in the early part of the 20th century. So Fort would collect all of these weird news stories from all over the world, and he would compile them in these massive volumes where then he would write about them, often speculatively and more often tongue-in-cheek. And one of his most famous quotes is, "One measures a circle beginning anywhere." And I've always taken that to mean that by studying any one aspect of the paranormal, you can understand something about all of it. So in studying cryptids, you can understand something about UFOs. And in studying UFOs, you can understand something about ghosts, because there seems to be a high level of interconnectedness between these otherwise seemingly disparate phenomena. Now, my introduction to winged humanoid sightings around Lake Michigan began in the spring of 2017 with a trio of sightings reported to the Mutual UFO Network. Now, MUFON was largely unable to follow up on those reports, and after publishing a short article about them for our website, I didn't really think that they were going to go anywhere, quite frankly. However, that's not what happened. Shortly after those sightings came in, further sightings began to be reported in droves. First to Phantoms and Monsters and UFO Clearinghouse, but soon directly to us and other organizations. So far, dozens of sightings have been reported to date, and if you're interested, because I couldn't possibly cover them all today, you can check out our books and articles for complete coverage. And today, really what I'm going to focus on are several sightings that we have investigated directly. So why am I calling this thing the Lake Michigan Mothman? I held off on comparing this case to the West Virginia flap of 66 to 67 for a long time because I didn't want to sensationalize it. I didn't want people to think that I was just using that name as an easy way to grab attention when it really wasn't warranted. But at a certain point, it just wasn't sensational to do so, really. It was simply the best way to contextualize the sightings so people understood immediately what sort of thing I was talking about. So the first such sighting that I would like to discuss today comes from a man named Gerald who reached out to me a couple of years ago. And this was in Braidwood, Illinois in 1957. So Gerald's sighting took place mid-morning in the early winter time when he was just 16 years old. He was out hunting for pheasants and rabbits with his brother Gene and Gene's brother-in-law. And as Gerald told me, as we were walking in this large open field, there was a lone, large tree standing in the middle of the field. When we were directly under it, a huge man-sized creature sailed over our heads into the woods across the road. We were stunned. We just looked at each other, too dumbfounded to speak. The winged creature had the body of a large man with legs, but it was covered over the whole body with dark, tan-colored feathers. This happened so long ago, I don't recall what the face looked like. I never knew who to tell my story to until I came across one of my articles about the man who saw a Birdman at O'Hare Airport. I'm glad to tell this story to someone who has knowledge of such creatures before I die. But that wasn't the end of Gerald's strange experiences. So several years later, while serving in the Army, he was stationed in Northfield, Illinois at a Nike Hercules missile site. Now, the missile site at which Gerald was stationed, which was active from 1955 to 1974, is just south of Chicago. Now, in Braidwood, where Gerald had his winged creature sighting, is approximately 70 miles southwest of the site. So it's 1963, and Gerald, as a young man, was on guard duty at a radar station there. So he told me it was after midnight when I witnessed a UFO in the sky southeast of my location, maybe a mile away, around 1,000 feet above the terrain. Gerald described the UFO to me as saucer-shaped, with rotating lights that encircled the craft, illuminating what looked like windows. He said, the size was difficult to know exactly, but I'd say about 100 feet in diameter. And the craft's color was indiscernible because it was nighttime. He said, I watched it for a few minutes before I made a phone call to our command offices in Arlington, Illinois, to report what I was observing. So, having performed his duty, Gerald thought that his involvement in this sighting was done. However, a few days later, he was contacted by somebody claiming to be Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So, if you're not familiar with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, he was the chief scientific advisor to the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was an official investigation into the UFO phenomenon. And what's interesting is that Gerald's sighting is documented in Project Blue Book. This is an excerpt from official documents from that project, and so you can see that they did indeed officially investigate his sighting. And so what Gerald told me was that Dr. Hynek had told me he was informed to tell me that what I saw was just a private airplane towing an advertising sign. I doubt they would be flying at that time of night. Now, there's no way a plane could ever make the moves I witnessed, and at the end of the encounter, this UFO just shot up into space as fast as a bullet. Now, while it's not known who exactly told Hynek to discredit Gerald's sighting, doing so would be consistent with the perceived aims of Project Blue Book. I think it's entirely possible that, since Dr. Hynek's specialty was in astronomy, someone within the Air Force disingenuously identified the object as an airplane and ordered him to report it as such to Gerald, despite any evidence to the contrary. Although it's also possible that the person claiming to be Dr. J. Allen Hynek was in fact someone else entirely. What we do know is that Dr. Hynek resented what he saw as Project Blue Book's mandate to debunk UFOs by the end of his time on that project, and he went on to have a celebrated career in honestly investigating UFOs after his time with that project was over. Now, our next sighting comes from the North Branch of the Chicago River, right in the middle of Chicago, 1971. Retired Chicago police officer David Ramos told me he was 12 years old in the fall of '71 when he saw a winged humanoid near the North Branch of the Chicago River. He was standing by himself on a path while his friends threw chunks of concrete into the water. David told me he didn't like to be so close to the water. He just wasn't comfortable standing there in a situation that he perceived as relatively dangerous. So David said, I looked northward, and I swear I saw a very tall, skinny man who was very dark on the path about 200 feet away. He looked like he had a cape on. He glanced my way and threw his arms up, and he had wings and ran and flapped them and disappeared into the trees towards the bank. He ran north a few steps, started beating his wings, and went up into the trees. He looked 7 feet tall. I thought he had like a scary Halloween mask on or something. He looked back in my direction, and I just couldn't make out a face. There was no focal point for me because it was not a human-type face. Big eyes was the thing I remember, like he had goggles on or something. They were yellowish red. I was petrified right there and looked around, but my friends were still south and still playing around. Now, David watched this thing until it literally took off into the air, and the experience had a profound effect on him that he's carried with him for the past 50 years. He told me, I never went back again. They built one of our stations right over there, the 19th District. That's where we used to exchange our cars and have our cars serviced. Even as a policeman, going over there for that, I still remembered that day, and it was very creepy. It stuck with me forever. And so David actually watched this creature, as it turned out, until it took off into the air. Now, this experience had a profound effect on him that he's carried with him for the past 50 years. He told me, "I never went back again. They built one of our stations right over there, the 19th District. That's where we used to exchange our cars and have our cars serviced. Even as a policeman, going over there for that, I still remembered that day, and it was very creepy. It stuck with me forever." Now let's go to Madison, Wisconsin, 2002. One evening in January of that year, Selena, who was 6 years old at the time, was in the car with her mother, Heather, when they encountered a red-eyed winged being. Their house had burned down a few weeks earlier in December, but luckily the company her father worked for at the time had paid for a fully furnished apartment until their apartment building could be rebuilt. Now, Heather had just turned onto Seminole Highway from the Beltline when she saw what was described as a large bat-like creature. She said it was very opaque in color and that it was very large. And when Heather turned to look at it, it turned to look at her. She said its eyes were glowing red and the face was very bat-like from what she could see. And it was flying, but it wasn't flapping its wings like a normal bat would. Instead, it was almost gliding, kind of. The creature was headed in the opposite direction and quickly flew overhead and disappeared. Although Selena was in the car when it happened, she didn't see the creature. However, she does remember her mother screaming and panicking. After moving back into their rebuilt apartment, Heather saw the creature again. She was in the basement doing laundry. She looked behind her into their storage unit and saw a large bat-like face with the same red glowing eyes. She said it had been staring back at her. Now, some family made fun of Heather, unfortunately, but she was legitimately traumatized by her experience. Interestingly enough, this family had a history of haunted phenomena. As Selena told me, almost everyone in that building who was open to the paranormal really thought the building was haunted. The building to which she is referring, of course, being the one that burned down, and also being the one in which Heather, after it was rebuilt, had her second sighting of a winged humanoid. So, one of the things they would experience is the family would hear a phantom baby crying. Selena said, "At the time, my brother was an infant, so my parents would go to check on him and he would be dead asleep, and they would still hear a baby crying. It was constant. It was almost nonstop. And they would also hear the phantom sound of dishes crashing. As Selena said, some nights they would hear all of the dishes flying out of the cabinets and crashing on the floor, and they would think that we had an intruder and everything was untouched. It was like nothing even happened." Fans of the Point Pleasant Mothman will recognize these phenomena as being similar to those described by other flying humanoid witnesses in that particular flat. The paranormal activity peaked when renovations were done to the basement just before it burned down. The activity continued after the restoration with another concerning incident involving fire. So as Selena told me, "I remember soon after the building itself was rebuilt after the fire, my aunt and uncle had been living in the upstairs unit above us. And I remember being up in their apartment once and my aunt was braiding my hair and I went downstairs because she was going to jump in the shower. They always had a decorative candle on their table. My family is Mexican, so they had those religious decorative candles. And they had one in the center of their coffee table. They didn't really light them up at that point in time. They never had a reason to. And so, like I said, I went downstairs. My aunt was in the shower. My uncle was in the bedroom. And when my aunt got out of the shower, she noticed that the entire apartment was full of smoke. She thought, 'Oh my God, there's another fire.' It was the candle. The candle itself had set on fire. It wasn't lit. It had just set on fire. It was in the center of the table, and it had even left a charred circle where it had been." So truly chilling stuff. And there's no way to say for certain that that is connected to any previous event, but it does make you think. And from Madison, we're going to go just a bit south to Rockford, Illinois in 2016. Jonathan Lane was 16 years old when, in August of 2016, he saw a giant shapeless black thing with two very large red eyes outside of his family home in Rockford, Illinois. It was nighttime, between 10:20 and 10:30 p.m. Jonathan had walked his mother to her car as she left for work, as he often did, and while walking back to the house, he heard a sound that he later described as like screeching brakes or something, and looked up. He said, "There's a big tree in our yard, and I see this giant, shapeless black thing. It has these very large red eyes." He went on to say, "As soon as I made eye contact with it, it made that sound again. Instantly, it fills me with fear and intimidation, and I run in the house and start freaking out. The sound was so weird. I can still hear it clearly in my head, like a large bird's caw. Reminds me of the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, like the velociraptors." He went outside the next day to measure the area wherein he had seen the creature to estimate its size. He told me, "I went outside and I looked where the branch was and tried to see where I had seen the top of it and where the blackness was compared to the tree. It was pretty substantial. It would have to be 9 feet tall. It was a large being. The wingspan just faded into the tree around it." And as you can see on the left here, Jonathan very conveniently took this photograph and even marked on it how tall the creature seemed from his perspective. And having visited the location personally, I can tell you if those marks are accurate, that thing had to be huge. Unfortunately, like Heather and many other witnesses, Jonathan was met with ridicule when he initially shared his story and kept it quiet for years afterward, at least until he saw the Small Town Monsters documentary Terror in the Skies. He said, "My father was there, and I told him about it, and he started laughing and making fun of me. So since then, I've just kept my experience very private, although I told my sister about it once. I've just never really forgotten about it. I never knew what it was. I saw the documentary Terror in the Skies, and it was just mind-blowing to see you guys talk about stuff like that. I just wanted to reach out somehow." Well, I'm very glad he did. Also, like several other witnesses we're going to cover today, Jonathan had a UFO sighting. Approximately a year after his sighting of the red-eyed entity, Jonathan said he saw an unidentified flying object in the same area. He was driving home with a friend, and they were almost to his house. He told me, "There are a lot of trees, and there's only a little section of the sky that's open right by my house, and that's where the big tree is where the previous incident happened. It was the same part of the sky. I'm not claiming it was anything special, but I saw a very prominent UFO, very large and very prominent." So Jonathan's friend stops the car and they get out for a better look. He said, "I just don't know what it was. It was clear enough where I could see panels, like windows. It was very scary. My friend, she's a bit younger than me, she got very scared, so we had to leave. Whatever that was, it was not normal. It was shaped like a pear. It had probably 100 windows all over it. It was lit up. It was very weird how it was lit up. The whole thing was illuminated, but it had lines of light, almost like waves of light going through it. It's hard to explain. It almost looked like it had white light stripes through it, but it was in undulating movement. The very top of it was black, and the very bottom of it was black, but the center was illuminated. I could see where it was being lit up, and it was like miniature squares making up the whole object." Whatever he saw, Jonathan's sightings definitely had an effect on him. He said, "Both of those things very much bothered me. We have a huge picture window in our living room, and it's a huge pet peeve of mine to make sure those curtains are closed, overlapping, so nothing shows at night. I had a room in the corner of the house nearby that tree, and eventually I had to move rooms." Let's move now from Rockford to Wauconda, Illinois, 2014. April 20th, 2014. Paula was sitting near a window in the bedroom of her ground-level apartment near the Lakewood Forest Preserve in Wauconda when she saw a bright beam of light come shooting down across the street at around 11 p.m. She said it was so bright and defined. The light lasted between 15 and 20 seconds. It was an orange-gold color and did not illuminate its surroundings, nor did it move much, making only a slight side-to-side or back-and-forth motion. The light retracted at one point, only to reappear a moment later. When it did, Paula fell back onto her bed in shock. She said, "Oh my God, this thing sees me. I had the deepest feeling this thing saw me. It knows." But the light retracted a final time and was gone. She told me, "I heard a hum at the end just before it took off." Now you can see to the left here a photograph taken from outside of Paula's apartment at the time that shows the area where that mysterious light beam appeared. 3 years later, in April of 2017, Paula was taking out the garbage one morning at around 6 a.m. when something drew her eye from across the street. She turned and saw a huge winged being in the same area as her previous sighting. Paula described the being as perhaps 7 to 8 feet tall when standing erect, but it carried itself hunched over, limping along. It was completely black, and from what she could see, its upper body and head were covered in hair. The being had long, leathery wings which were partially wrapped around its body as it moved towards her, jumping forward similarly to watching someone move through a strobe light. The creature made an unnatural groaning noise as it advanced. Paula felt a palpable sense of evil emanating from the bat-winged monster. She said, "This is evil. I'm seeing evil." Fearing for her safety, she quickly turned to flee back into her apartment. After fumbling with her keys for a moment, she opened the door and turned around, terrified that the creature might be right behind her. But it was gone. Here we find ourselves back in Rockford, Illinois in 2022. We were contacted that year by Shana Clippert, who said that she and her mother Barbara had seen both a massive black winged humanoid and a glowing UFO during the early morning hours of June 20th. Both sightings were either on or near Fork Kent Creek. The sightings began at approximately 1 a.m. when Shana and her mother were outside of her apartment. They were in the parking lot, where there's another empty parking lot between that and Fork Kent Creek and adjacent businesses on the other side that provided illumination. There was a line of trees on the creek's far side, but nothing obscuring the view on the near side. So Shana hears a screech that makes her turn in that direction, and that's when she sees a black silhouette crawl out of the creek. Barbara, of course, looks over to see what Shana's looking at and sees the thing, at which time it takes flight along the tree line. Shana estimated the creature's wingspan to be 12 feet and described the sound it made as a dinosaur screech, like a raptor screech, very similar to the sound described by Jonathan, also in Rockford. Shana said the creature reminded her of the character Marcus from the film Underworld because of its humanoid appearance and bat-like wings. And while that might sound strange to you, it's not unusual for witnesses to compare what they've seen to pop culture references. Now, we're talking about people who have seen something so far outside of their normal experience that they really struggle to find the words to describe it. And so comparing it to something, even a movie monster, can really help them relate their experience. So, as Shana said, it was massive, like hunched over when it was coming out of the canal. It looked like the size of our dumpster that we have in the back of our apartment building. It was huge. I have no clue what to even compare it to. It was super tall and big. When it was on the ground, it was like hunched over and crouched. It looked like this massive blob. When it initially left the ground, it flapped its wings, and it wasn't a super fast flap because the wings were so big. The canal goes down into a more vegetative spot, so we lost sight of it there. I was freaking out, she said. It was pitch black. All in all, the sighting lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes, she told me. Soon after the winged humanoid sighting, Shana told me that she and Barbara walked to this broken down fence that separates my area from this lot that's on the other side, between us and the canal. We were out there walking, and I asked my roommate to come downstairs and bring a flashlight so we can shine it in the tree line and see if we see anything. She came down in 15 minutes, didn't see anything. And we drove down to the park, but the trees are so dense down there that even if there was something in there, we wouldn't have seen it. So her roommate goes to the gas station for about 10 minutes, but Shana and Barbara remain outside. At that time, a light materializes above the empty lot, maybe 50 to 60 feet in the air. Shayna said it looked like if you were to see a sort of stingray, like a glowing stingray in the air. It had wings, but they were very fluid moving, very slow moving, and very thin, like if you look on the side of a stingray. It didn't look white, it looked like light, almost like a translucent, whitish light. We could see that thing almost glowing against the dark sky, and there was nothing that it could have reflected off of. It was a clear sky, or that could have caused that, like a spotlight. It was an actual physical thing there in the air. It wasn't just a white object, because the sky was pitch black. We saw the whole glowing silhouette, and it flew very smoothly and fluidly over to the street. It generally stayed the same height in the air. Then it turned around and came back over and literally disappeared in the same spot it materialized. It didn't go down, it didn't go up, it just vanished. Shayna was certain the glowing UFO couldn't have had any prosaic explanation, such as a spotlight. She told me there was nothing for light to reflect off of. There's no power cords or anything that run all the way down. It was like seeing electricity or a glowing orbit night, but it was long and skinny. And it moved like it was flapping wings, but it was very fluid, very smooth movement. Historical weather data confirms that the sky was clear at the time of her sighting, nor was there any wind to blow something that could have been misidentified, like a balloon. She's similarly certain about the winged entity. The screech did not sound like a person or animal, say a fox, coyote, or dog, nor did it look like a bird, such as a crane or heron. The experience left both Shayna and her mother upset and frightened, but they both feel strongly about what they experienced and are willing to go on the record about it. I was panicking when the UFO appeared, Shayna told me. I jumped behind my mom and I had this hunting knife. I don't know what I was going to do with it. It didn't come near us. It was weird that we were out there looking for whatever that creature was that flew away, and then we see this glowing thing in the sky. Although they hadn't seen anything like this since, the experience did lend a new, unsettling perspective to something that had happened just a week prior. Shayna told me about a week beforehand, I was walking up my back stairs. Again, it was late. My mom was sitting downstairs waiting for me to unlock my door, and I heard that screech. Time now to head to O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, Illinois in 2019. Now, I want to begin by saying I have not personally been able to verify any of the reports from this area taken by Lon or Manuel, and so I am unwilling to vouch for the credibility of those sightings. I will say this, however, I have been able to verify some of the other reports that have been published by Lon, and so I do tend to treat those with a bit more credibility at this point. Unfortunately, and not for lack of trying, I have been completely unable to verify even a single report that has come through UFO Clearinghouse. However, the Singular Fortean Society has received one report from O'Hare directly. A man who works in cargo for an airline in the airport said that he'd seen a red-eyed winged humanoid while driving on the night of December 6th. Again, this is 2019. He also agreed to the use of his first name. So Daniel had left work early that night to go meet friends. He told me, I was the last one to get out of work. I normally work until 11 p.m., but we got out a little earlier than expected. Around 10:15 or 10:20 p.m. is when I left. I was driving down West Higgins and I was headed to the bar to meet up with one of my friends from work. To my left, in a large patch of grass, is where I saw it. It was dark and there's a building with a certain amount of light near the sighting area. I was able to take a glimpse at it while I was driving. I saw headlights coming towards me as well. I'm always looking at that side because there's deer there. I'm always eager to look there to see them. I can tell the difference between a deer and what I saw. What I saw was not a deer. According to Daniel, the creature he saw matched exactly what was described by a witness on November 26th, who said he had seen a 7-foot-tall person with wings near the loading dock for Nippon Cargo Airlines. I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly, by the way. That sighting was reportedly submitted to Manuel. The only difference, Daniel said, was that the thing he saw had red eyes. He said he was able to estimate the creature's height by comparing it to a nearby fence, And also present was the feeling of evil described by other witnesses, such as Paula. Now, Daniel said that he was ready to dismiss his sighting until he found an article online describing the other man's experience. That was really weird because, honestly, I thought I was going crazy at first, he said. I said to myself, no, that can't be it. I don't think I saw that. After that, once I saw the article the day after my sighting, I thought, okay, I must not be going crazy because Nippon is not far from where my sighting took place. That was the craziest part. I kind of freaked out. I saw that something wasn't right. I saw it the same way that the other gentleman saw it. It felt really evil. It had those red eyes. How could any creature have those? I thought I was going crazy, man. I thought I was going crazy until I read the article. I must not be the only one who's seeing this stuff. Maybe it was just the fear I felt, but honestly, it didn't feel good at all. It was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen in my life. And now on to conclusions, such as they exist anyway. What are people seeing? Now, there are no definitive answers about these particular cases, and personally, I'm far more comfortable ruling out what they're not seeing than trying to say what they are. The cases I've presented today are very unlikely to represent misidentified animals. Now, a good number of cases in the overall investigation are misidentified birds, but the traits evident in those sightings are not present in these. So, take, for instance, a case out of the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago from May of 2018. A young man was bicycling to work one day when he noticed a man and a woman on a street corner pointing at something in the sky. So, naturally curious, he looked up and he saw what he later described to me as either a giant bat or a man in a wingsuit. And since he happened to have a GoPro camera on his bicycle helmet, he decided to follow this thing around and get as much footage of it as he could before he had to go to work. And he did. He did a great job, in fact. And he was very, very forthright with this evidence after he had captured it. So he was very willing to provide it to us. He actually sent us the original SD card that the image was shot on, or the footage was shot on. And with his help, we were able to find the creature in this footage and isolate it, blow it up in Photoshop, and it was a bird. I mean, it 100% was a bird. You can see one of the enlarged images here on this slide, and that's the silhouette of a bird. Now, I don't think that he was trying to hoax anything. I don't think he was making anything up. I think he legitimately and accidentally misidentified this large migratory bird, possibly based on its silhouette, something like a great blue heron, as a giant bat or a man in a wingsuit. And they are freaky looking birds. If you've never seen one fly, they're huge. They kind of look like dinosaurs. It's easy to mistake one for a monster, but the traits in those sightings, those types of sightings, are not the same as what we've seen today. So the nice thing about the Pilsen sighting was that it allowed me to create a profile for these misidentified bird sightings, because up until then I had been seeing similar sightings, but I didn't have the smoking gun that I could point to say, okay, these are almost certainly misidentified birds. And so what they have in common is they are almost always daytime sightings of something flying relatively far away from the witness, and they don't have the same kinds of associated paranormal phenomena that we see in these other sightings. So there's no unreasonable fear, for instance. There's no glowing red eyes. There's no haunting phenomena. There's no associated UFO sightings or any of the stuff that we have come to see in these cases, that if you believe the witness testimony, and I have no reason to believe currently that any of these people are doing anything other than authentically relating their experience, they couldn't possibly be misidentified animals. So I also think it is unlikely to be an undiscovered animal species. And that's mostly because it defies our understanding of biology. I mean, how does it fly? It shouldn't be able to fly. Something with the dimensions that people are describing, so 7 to 8 feet tall with only a 12 to 15 foot wingspan, should never be able to get off the ground. What does it eat? We should be noticing predation on local wildlife. If there is something that big or a population of something that big that is feeding on them, like that would be noticeable. And where does it live? There aren't really places in these sighting areas where a natural animal like this could, especially again that size, could be living without being noticed. Now on to everybody's favorite, the weird stuff. The paranormal phenomena associated with these sightings opens a number of weird possibilities. For instance, is there an interdimensional aspect? Now, I want to point out that when I use the word interdimensional, I strive to use it accurately. A lot of times when people use interdimensional, what they mean is parallel universe. I do not. What I'm asking is, could this being or beings exist in dimensions to which we are not privy? And to help us understand that, I think it's useful to think about what it would be like to interact with a being that did exist in more dimensions than us. And I think the easiest way to try to understand that is to picture what it would be like for us to interact with a two-dimensional being. So like, let's say you have this two-dimensional being, it only exists in 2 dimensions. It's basically a line, on this plane. And here we are with 3 whole dimensions to work with. We've got 3 of them. It only has 2. What would it be like for us to interact with this being? Well, from its perspective, we could pop into and out of its reality seemingly by magic, and it would only ever see as much of us, or that portion of us that was in the 2-dimensional plane, that it could actually perceive. So not only are we able to interact with it on our terms all the time, and there's nothing it can do about it, but it can never even see all of us. Now, is that the case with this being or beings? Maybe, and if so, boy, is that unsettling. Could there actually be a parallel universe or universes at play here? Could this being or beings exist only temporarily in our universe before returning to whence they came? There are sudden disappearances of these things, sometimes described by witnesses, and sometimes they do talk about them disappearing into portals. So whether or not what we have is a being coming here from a parallel universe, or us just seeing through a sort of window into theirs, is impossible to say, but it is something interesting for us to consider, I think. Is this a spiritual entity? Could this being or beings be some sort of disincarnate being? It does seem to interact directly with and or influence consciousness. For instance, when people describe this feeling of evil, when people talk about this almost supernatural level of fear. Now, I didn't cover this particular sighting today, but one of the more interesting sightings that I have received involves someone who actually felt this profound fear prior to actually seeing the being itself, almost as though the fear was projected onto it. And so we have to ask ourselves, is there some sort of spiritual or consciousness connection here? Or is this some maddening combination of all 3 or something else entirely? We can only speculate at this point. The only thing that I can say is the reports have high strangeness elements that speak to a strange hidden reality, and I think that we must be prepared to challenge our own preconceptions of reality and what is possible in order to understand this phenomenon. That's going to do it for me today, but I want to thank you all so much for joining me. And if you're interested in what we do at the Singular Fortean Society and you'd like to keep up with us, please visit our website at singularfortean.com or on pretty much any social media platform from Facebook to Twitter to Tumblr to Instagram to TikTok at Singular Fortean. And if you're interested in buying any of our books, you can do so, of course, at singularfortean.com/books to order directly, or of course through your favorite online retailer such as Amazon. All right, again, thank you so much, and until next time, keep it weird.